Welcome to this course on masterpieces of ancient art. Many, if not most, of our great works of art from classical, modern, and contemporary times have roots in the earliest art that was created. In this course, we're going to be looking at some of the most compelling and immediately understandable images of ancient times, as well as some enigmatic masterpieces of art that require careful explanations. Whether it is art from ancient Egypt or the abstract weavings of the Inca, though, there are common impulses at work. We are going to see how humans create art that serves a purpose in each society. I will show you how that common thread winds its way down to the art of today. Let's start with this painting. It is called Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? This is a modern masterpiece by the post-impressionist painter Paul Gauguin. To fully understand this painting, you need to know much more about the great civilizations that preceded our modern age. Gauguin drew on his knowledge of art, which went way beyond European art and tradition. He looked at and admired the Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, Roman, Oceanic, Japanese, Javanese, Buddhist, and even ancient Peruvian traditions of art and spirituality. He was part Peruvian, in fact, and had lived in Peru and found inspiration there. Gauguin sought to escape from an unfeeling and complex industrial age, the modern world that was unfolding in the 19th century. He abandoned his family in France, set sail for the South Seas and Tahiti. He lived there, producing some of the most haunting and memorable paintings of the age. In his possession, he had a few tattered photographs pasted on cardboard, which inspired his art. These photos were of the reliefs from the greatest Javanese monument, the Buddhist stupa of Borobudur, scenes from Egyptian tomb painting, the column of Trajan in Rome, and from the frieze of the Parthenon. Gauguin created this painting to tell the deeply moving saga of human life. Life begins here as a narrative unscrolling from the right. The baby at the extreme right is guarded over by a recumbent black dog and three coyly gesturing seated Tahitian women. A grand, glowing golden statue-like figure at the center reaches for the sky to pluck a fruit. At the left and to the rear of center, a pale, radiant blue statue of an idol seems to bless the gathered group, which includes a goat, two white kittens, a colorful, strutting phoenix-like bird, and a white puffin at the left. A dying old woman, leathery brown, is huddled to the left of a child eating the fruit and a lovely young woman who seems to be lost in thought. All of this is set in a colorful, lush paradise of blue branches and blue seas from Gauguin's imagination. Gauguin considered it his greatest masterpiece and was ready to commit suicide after he created it. But these figures are not from Gauguin's imagination alone. They have direct ancestors in the art of other lands and peoples. This is his own reinterpretation of a whole encyclopedia's worth of ancient, exotic art. Let's look closely. The blue idol or deity statue draws from the ancient Buddhas of Java. The old woman mimics an ancient Peruvian mummy bundle, and the figure's postures and the images of animals recall Egyptian tomb painting. The whole tableau of figures, it seems, faces outward, rather like the photograph of a relief at the Javanese Buddhist temple of Borobudur, which Gauguin treasured. Gauguin, it turns out, was fascinated by these ancient and foreign cultures. The painting should evoke for most of us a longing or appreciation of a lost paradise, the lush tropical land that is depicted, but also it should stir the feelings for a lost past. What the painting really does is set forth the idea or notion that all humans are on a quest for meaning in life. And that meaning involves comprehending our past. In this course, we shall examine that past and examine the meaning that past works hold for our own time. Surviving the test of time, beauty and media. We will be looking at art, mostly in the form of functional objects, things that were made as far back as 35,000 years ago, to as recently as 500 years ago. The artworks come from vastly different parts of the world, but what they have in common is that they are some of the best efforts of human creators. They've inspired generations of artists, many more besides Gauguin, and have seeped into our understanding and visual culture in a way that is sometimes hard to recognize. We'll be looking at art from widely differing traditions. Here, you can see the broad range of places we'll cover from across the globe. We'll be looking at many different types of art, small and large, in widely different media. We'll begin with painting on walls, starting with the spectacular cave art at Chauvet in France. Then we'll look at architecture, usually of stone, but mud brick too, beginning with the ancient ziggurat or temple tower at Ur in Mesopotamia. We shall see a great many sculptures, mostly of stone as well. But sculpture has many forms. It can take the form of a vase, for instance, or be part of architecture, like a temple relief, or a freestanding sculpture that is part of an ensemble. We'll look at examples from the Royal Cemetery at Ur in Mesopotamia, the Parthenon in Greece, and Egyptian tombs and temples. We'll examine the colossal heads of the Olmec, the stone reliefs of the Maya, and colossal stone sculptures of the Aztec. We'll see objects of ceramic, metalwork, and textiles. We'll look at the unusual glazed ceramic bricks of Babylon, the gold, precious metal, and stones of Egypt and Peru. We even have a masterpiece woven of alpaca wool from the looms of the Andes. Many examples of artworks are even elaborate combinations of materials, like this sacred stand depicting a gold shell and lapis lazuli goat rearing up. Art that survives from ancient times depends on vagaries of climate, conditions, and material. So many great works of art, unfortunately, have not survived the test of time or the onslaught of human destruction. Just think of what was lost to looting or blown up with explosives, like at the Parthenon. Not all art, however, was meant by its makers to survive. Some cultures intended their things to survive, and other cultures actually didn't. The process of making the art was sometimes the most important aspect of a ritual, and when we find some things of that nature today, we're delightfully surprised. Art that does survive depends upon the material of which it is made, the environment in which it exists, and the intent of the artists. Some art is purposely buried or killed, destroyed, or repurposed, as we see with the Olmec. Things made of cotton, feathers, leather, and wool or wood are much less likely to survive the centuries, so textiles rarely survive through time. Wood disintegrates, so it's also rare, and unfortunately, valuable metals are melted. Most of the gold work from South America was melted down, including beautiful and fine objects and sculpture which were not even judged to be art at the time of the conquistadors. This is why certain regions will be underrepresented in this course. Some areas have little stone available, and tropical arts besides stonework, like wood, disintegrate faster in the climate. Unfortunately, we have less to show from ancient times from sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and the Amazon. Population centers are the major source for most of the masterpieces we'll see. Urban areas have more art, and they need more art to reinforce group pride and identity, and in order to show hierarchy and rank. What does it mean to need more art? Why should ancient art be important to us, and why should we bother with it? Art is primarily a form of communication. It expresses ideas and thoughts of universal interest, as well as those particular to a certain culture. We may need help to read it for cultures that are foreign to us. Art tells us a great deal about diverse human responses to different climates, regions, threats, and population densities. How do different peoples adapt and evolve in different conditions around the world? It's expressed in art. People work with the materials they have, and they are endlessly inventive. We'll look at ancient art and see that it has a number of very practical functions and that some of these functions overlap. These include to communicate religious ideas, supplications to gods and spirits, and to allay anxiety. Some art depicts calendrics, which is a society's approach to recording time over long periods, or the structure of the cosmos and humans' place within the world. Some functions include to show status and rank in a society, like elaborate jewelry and sumptuous textiles, or to legitimize and propagandize a state, like with the Parthenon sculptures, and sometimes they have all of those functions together. Art lays bare the concerns of humanity. Some concerns are universal, and others are particular. We see the themes of the art expressing these concerns and others. As we learn more about these ancient masterpieces, we'll see these universal themes over and over again, expressed with different aesthetic styles in varying media. So let's discuss these universal themes. What do they consist of? First is survival and fertility, the most elemental theme, and the one at the heart of all the others. Gods associated with fertility can be both male and female, and are usually the first gods that we see in the most ancient art. Ancient peoples, like people of today, survived by managing relationships with one another and with what they believed to be the larger supernatural powers of the earth. Dominance and rulership. Much art is created to legitimize the status of the ruler. Communities with a strong structure, usually headed by a respected ruler, tended to survive better than looser communities with no clear head. So many superb artworks are in fact a form of visual propaganda for rulers. They put the ruler at the center of the cosmos. In some cultures, they deify the ruler. Sometimes they show a ruler's skill at warfare and conquest. And they put the ruler between the gods and the populace as an intercessor. Warfare in these artworks is a common subject. It ties into rulership and the power of the state. The ruler and people seek to protect and defend themselves, both life and resources. Territoriality is an undercurrent. Funerary rites or themes are extremely important, and they're often all that survives. Grave goods can be attempts to overcome death or achieve rebirth. Religious, mythic, and cosmic imagery that explains the universe is another theme. Just think of the Aztec calendar stone. Animals are an extremely important theme and subject. They're seen in much of the ancient art, from caves to the royal cemetery at Ur, Egypt, Moche, Paracas, and Peru. Ancient artists represented the world around them, usually with a great and very observant eye. Animals could express ideas about the cosmos and the universe as metaphors for many concepts and qualities. Merged with each other or with gods, animal images become supernaturals. Supernatural forces are embodied by some animals, like lions that kill or birds that fly to the celestial realm. Animals' dominance in ancient art is due to our debt. We rely upon animals for food, we're threatened by them, and we admire their very special qualities, like birds in flight, and so we liken them to gods. We're imprinted from ancient times with animal images. Themes and concerns in art are not always the same, however. They can vary from culture to culture, and some show very specific concerns. For instance, athletic competition. Greeks emphasized this in classical times. Humans, not animals, are the most important subject to Greeks. Blood and human sacrifice. Ancient American cultures emphasized this in art, although it occurred all around the world. It could be intimidating and gruesome as a subject for art. Blood sacrifice was performed, though, usually as a debt to the gods. There are also geography-defined themes and concern. Desert areas, for instance, are naturally more concerned with water resources and irrigation, while tropical areas seek to manipulate water. The power of the sun and weather is everywhere, and these natural forces show up in the art and myth as both positive and negative at times. We'll be seeing many mountains. Pyramids and high temple platforms are a universal form. They bring humans closer to the heavens and the celestial realm of the gods. In most cultures, the gods were believed to dwell higher up in the peaks, stars, or heavens, except, of course, for gods of the underworld or the sea. Being higher was also a simple expression of rank and dominance in the animal kingdom, which we subconsciously repeat. Hence, we have colossal or raised statues or monuments to rulers. These mountains can be for different uses. Stepped temples to gods can be climbed for rites, like the ziggurats of Ur. Egyptian pyramids are meant for the burial and resurrection of the king, not meant to be climbed. Maya pyramids and temples are often tombs as well, and are also meant for rites and act as a stage. Volcanoes are a special case of mountain. They inspire awe and fear, conduits for unusual and strong natural forces from within the earth. Fire, lava, and smoke come out of them. It helps to think of ancient art as adaptive behavior. It's important to understand that ancient art was not art for art's sake. These masterpieces of ancient art are all functional in some manner. Some are absolutely breathtakingly beautiful, but all served a very clear purpose in the community. They worked in some way to strengthen and sustain a group, usually through ritual activities of which the art was a part. And I believe you will be surprised to see how the serious purpose of art in the ancient world is still the purpose of much of the art of today: to define and strengthen community in order to motivate devotion and loyalty, to give courage to warriors who will defend, to give honor to gods, and to seek their protection. Let me explain how I define masterpieces. I think you can see that there is an essential need for and importance of art, but what about this idea of a masterpiece? Most objects from ancient times that we deem art today were created for function, usually a religious one, and might not have ever been labeled art. They might be the most beautiful or elaborate ritual object with that function, but their shape and material was determined by the function. Master, of course, implies the highest skill. An object of art that is a masterpiece has to inspire awe. It has to speak to us and impress us in ways that other objects don't or can't. It pleases us in a sensual manner and may challenge us intellectually as well. So an artwork's success consists of expressing symbolism or narrative extremely well. Or it might consist of rare, precious materials and colors, handled deftly, and then it might spark the same reaction of awe. Labor-intensive, complex works also inspire awe. We can describe the object which is a masterpiece by saying it is a tour de force. In other words, a combination of great skill and the highest level of ability. These are some of the attributes that might make a masterpiece. Size. Large size or great height can be a surpassing characteristic. They inspire because of the intimidating effect and because of the knowledge that it took so much labor, time, and of course skill. Verisimilitude. Copying nature in an inspired way, portraying events or figures with a sense of surpassing reality and beauty can inspire admiration and astonishment. Proportions and symmetry matter to us in a biological sense. We know that we are guided by our sensory toolkit and evolution in what we consider beautiful, as biologists have shown. For instance, certain waist-to-hip ratios in females are universally considered preferable to males. They're assessing beauty and reproductive fitness of potential mates. Motion. Now, showing motion in a naturalistic manner was a goal of the Greeks, but was not a goal in every culture. Nevertheless, showing it well is pleasing to us. Complexity of skill can also astonish us, especially when it involves something very small or the use of very difficult materials to work with, like metal. So miniatures can be masterworks. Success at expressing a message, emotion, movement, a historical scene, all this contributes to our satisfaction and pleasure and delight with an object. Now, piquing the imagination with mystery, we like the challenge of complex, different, and mysterious art. It inspires us to look closely and to try to understand it. Let's talk about style. We're going to see many different styles of art and means of expression. Why do different regional styles exist in art? We have no simple answer, but we do know that it depends upon materials that are used and grows out of a need for group affiliation. We have instant visual acknowledgement of who someone is, what group they belong to, or what belongs to them through style. The first art was probably body paint and adornment, and this identified a group and an individual. It serves to help a group cohere. It can be a form of both advertisement and propaganda. You can intimidate people through style, and/or you can wow them with elegance and skill. Style propagates a visual message to a populace. It can be one of pride, as at the Parthenon, or control in an empire like the Inca, which used its characteristic trapezoidal openings and instantly identifiable stonework and its abstract textiles to exert authority. Style can exert command over a diverse population and remind them of a bureaucratic and centralized authority, particularly in an illiterate civilization or society. Now, style in realistic representations can be a choice made according to the demands of the culture creating it. Realistic and natural painting or sculpture, like cave painting, shows up in the very earliest art. You would expect some primitive attempts to render an animal at that time or before, crude beginnings, but reality runs counter to our expectations for the crude and primitive beginnings. We see that early Mesopotamians concentrated their efforts on animals and other subjects. The human body was usually rendered as a cylindrical shape without concern for muscles and imitating nature, but animals were carefully observed and rendered. More abstract shapes, colors, and forms were preferred by Andean groups. They especially liked to create supernatural creatures, animals that were an amalgamation of different parts: a monkey's feet, a cat's toothy grin, a shark's fin, a bird's wings. This creation of monsters or mythical creatures is something that occurs in all cultures, but in South America they took it to a new level. So you can see that these are choices. We're choosing our masterpieces from what has survived. A lot of what we're going to look at comes from a funerary context, where it was buried to be secure. Palaces and homes were long gone after thousands of years, but graves endured. The main theme for art from a funeral context is the search for immortality. Some of the greatest works were created in this context and for this purpose. Cultural differences are evident in the artwork created for death that you will see. Death around the world is feared or emphatically marked everywhere, but the way it's treated in art differs. Let's consider the sacred sphere and architecture. Temples took different forms around the world, but most are built high up. They often function as artificial mountains. Tombs took many different forms, but that quest for immortality characterizes much of the surviving ancient art. So, for instance, the stupa of Sanchi in India is said to have the relics of Buddha, some of his ashes, in the center of its dome. In fact, Buddha's ashes were parceled out to several different places. The burning of a body seen here is quite different from the Egyptians' obsession with mummification and keeping the body intact for rebirth. In Peru, shaft-like tombs held elaborate mummy bundles in some places. The Andean pre-Columbian civilizations, like the Inca, preserved the bodies of rulers and even fed, clothed, and consulted royal mummies. In some cultures, sacrificed children were buried on mountaintops. The Inca continued this tradition in South America, and the Ice Maiden and other mummies help us understand the rituals. Moche lords in Peru had immensely elaborate burials with layers in the platform mound of Sipan, for instance. The Maya also buried some rulers, like Pakal the Great of Palenque, in funerary pyramids with complex imagery of death and rebirth. Lesser-ranked people or ordinary mortals often got quite a different burial than rulers or elites, under a house, in a mass grave, or just simple pits in the earth if they were not cremated or otherwise disposed of. Let's talk about the kind of cultures we will be seeing in this course in terms of size and development. The stage of development and religious beliefs of a culture had a huge effect on its artistic output. We have differing levels of population density and complexity of society through time. For instance, cave painting was created with a small population of bands of hunter-gatherers, probably 100 to 150 people in a band. Shamanism and spirit world specialists were important and began to emerge. Chiefdoms were slightly larger, more organized, with a ruler who demanded the production of more luxury goods to show status. So we begin to see grave goods that consist of gold and precious items. Moche burials may indicate this. Advanced forms of ancestor worship use elaborate or treasured goods, like the bronze vessels of the early Chinese. The Maya, like the Chinese Shang dynasty, had a form of ancestor worship. When you get to the level of complexity of a state with urban centers, artistic creation seems to explode. This results in propagandistic art that glorifies the state, like the Achaemenid reliefs at Persepolis. All this complexity bears upon the art that we will now see. The ancient artworks are going to take us from the dawn of art with the cave painting of Chauvet about 30 to 35,000 years ago. will go up to much more recently in the Americas, 800 AD and even later. I selected these works for several reasons. I consider them the greatest masterpieces of ancient art, but of course there are many more. These fit together in terms of themes and have diverse mediums and geographic areas. I wanted to include both some well-known and some much lesser-known artworks. I hope to help us all view them in a new light. They're also works I know well and can explain. I have chosen these artworks to some extent upon the basis of the technical development of the society and when it was settled. So the Americas are included, although much of what I consider ancient art comes later in time than the Old World. Why? The ancient Americas were populated much later than Africa, Asia, the Near East, and Europe. They essentially employed Stone Age technology up until European contact in the 1500s, but they reached great artistic sophistication. So their artwork fits in with earlier works from these other regions. We'll look at things from different geographic regions and start out with the Paleolithic cave. From there, we'll go to the Near East, Egypt, Greece, Rome, and on to China, India, and Southeast Asia, and we'll end in the New World, the Americas. And I have to tell you, although the course title is 30 Masterpieces of Ancient Art, we're actually going to be looking at a few more, simply because I couldn't resist. And it didn't make sense to call it 30 Masterpieces of Ancient Art, more or less. So let us begin at the beginning with the astonishing art of the Paleolithic painters. Chauvet Cave in France will give us a peek into the dawn of the human mind and the art which it could create at this early stage.